Hi everybody. I hope you've had a really lovely start to the week, and thank you so much for joining us for the 2025 iteration of the annual CRIG Seminar. My name is Ramona Naika, and I am the Gen AI Framework Activation Project Lead and also a Program Delivery Lead at Deakin University Library. Today, I'm also wearing the hat of Chair of the CRIG Seminar Working Group. And throughout the year, the working group members have worked really hard to plan this seminar, which we'll all be jointly facilitating over the next 3 days. The name of this year's seminar is Open Doors, Open Minds, Shaping Inclusive Library Futures. As we all know, libraries have long been gateways to knowledge, communities, and opportunities. And today, as we navigate this increasingly diverse and digital world, the role of libraries is really evolving, as is our approach to inclusion. So this seminar invites you to explore how libraries can open their doors wider and foster open minds by embracing inclusive practices, highlighting versatile resources, and spotlighting innovative projects. So across 3 webinars, we'll hear from thought leaders, from practitioners and advocates who are reimagining library services to better reflect and serve the richness of our communities. And we hope that each webinar will really inspire new ideas and spark meaningful conversations about the future of libraries. As we get started, I would, of course, like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands across Australia where we live, learn and work. We acknowledge and celebrate the inherent strengths of Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and other First Nations peoples and communities, and we recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, sky and culture. We pay our deep respects to the elders past and present, and I'd also like to welcome and extend my respects to First Nations peoples attending today. As I very briefly mentioned, today I'm joining you from Wurundjeri country, which is part of the Kulin Nations. And those who follow the seminar promotion on LinkedIn over the past month might be familiar with the Raven mascot competition that we're running, and that closes at the end of today. One of the reasons that we chose the Raven as a mascot for this year's seminar is its connection to Aboriginal peoples of the Kulin Nations. So Wa, which is the raven or crow, is one of the 2 main social totems of the Kulin Nations. And it's known as both a creator figure and also a trickster. So alongside Bundil, which is the wedge-tailed eagle, Wa is an important ancestral spirit whose story shapes identity and social relationships across the Kulin Nations. And this is the country where most of Coval's members' libraries are located today as well. So before we start, I've got to do a little bit of housekeeping. So if you have any technical questions during the session, please type them into the chat and a member of the Coval team will assist you with that. The chat is also a place for you to connect to other people today, so you can share your reflections, your thoughts, or anything raised during the presentation, so you can pop that in there. At a virtual event like this, the digital chat plays a really amazing role as connector and the kind of thought stimulus. But if you do find the chat distracting, then you're very welcome to not engage with it, or you can open it in a separate window and kind of hide it behind something else too. I would really like to acknowledge and thank our neurodivergent attendees and those with visible and invisible disabilities for being here today. Throughout the webinar, you're very welcome, of course, to take breaks, use assistive tech, or interact in a way that supports your comfort and focus. You're also very welcome to drop a sunflower emoji into the chat to indicate engagement if you're off camera. You're all welcome to engage with the content on social media. The CRIG Seminar Working Group are going to be using LinkedIn and the hashtag CRIG 2025. If you've got any questions for the speakers throughout the webinar, please submit them through the Zoom Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll get to as many as possible through the Q&A segments. Throughout the Q&A function, you can also see the questions of other people, so do upvote them or add comments to them if you feel that's appropriate. The questions in the Q&A function will be refreshed for each presentation. So today's event will comprise of a keynote, a pecha kucha, a lightning talk, and a short presentation. So we're jam-packed today. The keynote and the final presentation will have their own Q&A segments, while the pecha kucha and lightning talk will share a Q&A segment. So both of those will be together. I'm going to shortly introduce the CRIG Seminar's first keynote presenter, while my working group colleague Sarika Singh, who is the Liaison Librarian of Business and Economics and Education from the University of Melbourne, is going to facilitate the Q&A with them. Further CRIG Seminar Working Group members will join the facilitation efforts after the break, and we'll introduce them as we go too. So I'm very excited to introduce our first presenter, who is also the seminar series' first keynote, and this is Dr. Jane Garner. As Associate Professor, Jane is a Library and Information Studies academic who is researching and teaching within the School of Information and Communication Studies at Charles Sturt University. Her research focuses on the social justice of libraries and their contribution to the lives of disadvantaged individuals and communities, including people living in adult and juvenile prisons, people experiencing homelessness. Jane's also interested in the safety and well-being of library staff as they work with these communities, and joins us today to deliver her keynote on understanding workplace trauma and challenging behaviours in libraries. So on behalf of everyone here today, I'd like to extend a really warm welcome to Dr. Jane Garner. And thank you, Jane, so much for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. And it's really great to see so many familiar names and faces popping up. So hello to everyone that I know here. It's nice to see you here. All right, I'm going to have a crack at sharing my screen. It worked before, so it probably won't work now, but we'll give it a go. Okay, so yes, this is the title of my presentation to you, Understanding Workplace Trauma and Challenging Behaviours in Libraries. Before I get started on that, though, I just want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the place that I have the privilege to live and work here in Naarm or Melbourne. I thank them for their care and love of the land, water and sky around me every day, and to pledge to continue to learn from Indigenous knowledge to understand more about the place that I get to call home. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and members of other Indigenous communities who are with us today. And that's our beautiful skyline here in Melbourne or Naarm. So the things that I'm going to be talking to you about today it's all about research that I did in public libraries. But every time I present about this to some group of a broader audience, I get a whole heap of academic library people coming up to me as well saying, this is our story as well. It's not just happening in public libraries. So I hope that what I tell you today, although it's relevant, the data is relevant to public libraries, I hope that you'll find some relevance to your situation as well in academic libraries. So the outline of what I'll be talking to you about for the next half an hour, 40 minutes or so is what I've learned about challenging behaviours in public libraries from the research that I've been doing. And I'm going to introduce you to a model that tries to explain what's happening in libraries and the impact that that's having on our staff, called the library trauma cycle. And then I'll have a quick look at what some other industries and workplaces are doing to respond to challenging behaviours in libraries. Before I get too much further in it, what I've done is I've included a lot of comments verbatim, so word for word, from library workers that I've spoken to about their traumatic workplace experiences. And these can actually be quite hard to hear. So I'll let you know when I'm about to say something that could be upsetting or challenging for you to listen to, so you can just turn the sound off for a couple of minutes if you want to. So firstly, a little bit about me. As you heard before, I am an Associate Professor of Information Studies at Charles Sturt University, and I can see there's a whole bunch of Charles Sturt people here, which is fabulous, and also some beloved RMIT people as well. But this is the building that I supposedly work from. This is in Wagga Wagga in New South Wales. Because our students are all online, all our academics are online as well, and we all live all over the place. But if you haven't been to the campus at CSU, this is the building that we all work from. Before I started working at CSU, I worked in academic libraries. So I worked at the University of Melbourne from, I think it was 1990 to 2009. And it was during that time that I studied part-time while I worked full-time for my Bachelor of Library Studies at RMIT. And since that time, since I think between 2009 and 2019, when I started at CSU, I was having babies and looking after babies and doing sessional teaching and all sorts of things in between before I landed a proper job at CSU, which has been great for me. So the data that I'm going to be using in this presentation, it comes from a broader study which was about public libraries in the lives of people experiencing homelessness. I gathered the data between 2023 and early this year. And there were four main streams of data that I was working with to try and understand the role of public libraries in the lives of people experiencing homelessness. I did a really big national survey of public library workers about their experiences and attitudes towards people experiencing homelessness being in the public libraries. I did a second survey of public library users about their experiences and attitudes about sharing library spaces with people who they think may have been homeless. I interviewed social service providers who work as part of their work with people who are experiencing homelessness to see if they were working with libraries at all, if there were any good partnerships that were in there. And I also spent time in homeless shelters and in crisis centres interviewing people who were experiencing homelessness about their use of public libraries and their experiences. One of the questions that I asked library workers was about their feelings of safety when working alongside people experiencing homelessness. And I almost didn't ask this question, but I decided to put it in at the last minute because I thought maybe it would throw up something useful. I was really, really surprised when I got the data back to see that 46% of library workers have felt it unsafe at work because of the behaviour of someone they think might be homeless. Now, if I'd asked the question more broadly, have you ever felt unsafe at work because of the behaviour of a library user, then I'm assuming it would be much, much higher because this was just asking about one tiny cohort of people that are in the libraries. So I think it's very likely that if I'd asked a broader question, we'd be getting a whole lot higher percentage of people who felt unsafe at work. I was really surprised at this. I had no idea that this was going on in public libraries. And I thought this is a story that needs to be told because our workforce deserves to feel safe at work. So in an attempt to understand what was going on in the public libraries, I started asking staff questions when I visited about their experiences of workplace violence and aggression. And during this time, I was invited to run a workshop at the Queensland Public Library Association conference in fabulous, wet, hot, steamy Townsville. And one of the things I was able to do there was to run a workshop where I was able to survey the attendees who were all public library workers. Most of them were like branch leaders or sort of senior people within the library, but there was also a handful of people who were sort of more front of house work. And I was able to survey them about their experiences of workplace violence and aggression in their library. So this was asking that question much more broadly, not just because of someone who you think might be homeless, but at work, have you ever had these experiences? And these are the results I've got. So there was only 84 people in the room, and of them, 82 people had received verbal abuse at work. 17% had been attacked by a weapon. You can see the results there. These are just the top 9 responses. There was a whole bunch more. The table just kept going and going of all the various things that people had been subjected to or had witnessed in their workplaces. So you can see it's a huge thing and really scary stuff like sexual abuse and being recorded. There's some guy apparently at the moment who's taken it on as his quest to start at the top of Australia and work down the east coast of Australia and to go into every public library and film the library staff at the information desks and the circulation desks because he believes that they are government workers and he pays his taxes, so he's entitled to make videos for his own personal use of library workers. That's the sort of stuff that's going on. So I wanted to know more about what was going on and to try and understand what was happening in our public libraries. Pardon me. So I continued on with my project, and part of the work that I did then was to talk with 59 library workers. So I visited 6 public libraries, 2 city ones, 2 regional ones, and 2 remote ones. I conducted interviews with 59 library workers right across the spectrum of, front of house right through to the CEO type people about their experiences of working with homeless people, but also about workplace safety and their experiences of challenging behaviours. So I got so many stories about what they were putting up with as part of their daily work life. And I managed to then look at how could I try and make sense of all these stories? And I use a framework by these people, Brashear, Maloney, and Thornton Duringe, who wrote an article right back in 1981. So that shows you how long ago this was already starting to be an issue. And they managed to look at all the different types of challenging behaviours in libraries and split them into 3 groups. So I've been able to take the experiences of the people that I spoke to when I was doing this research and put those experiences into the 3 groups. And I think it's a really useful framework for explaining what it is that library workers put up with in their workplaces. I'm now going to move on to a slide where I'm going to talk to you about some examples of each of these 3 things. These are the things that can be hard to listen to. So if you would rather not hear them, please jump back in 4 slides time. Okay, so the first type of challenging behaviour that we're seeing in libraries is this type 1, relatively harmless nuisances. So these are people who aren't overtly threatening, but they can be disruptive or offensive. They can be like people who are showing examples of like substance abuse or alcohol abuse, people who just stare at other people, people who smell poorly. And even though these are kind of minor and you know they're there, but they're not particularly disruptive, they can cause stress for staff, particularly when other patrons come up and say, you need to fix this because this isn't great. So some examples of things that people were telling me that fit into this category. And these are quotes from the interviews that I did with them. Sometimes I just hope that no one is going to come up to me and tell me to tell this man to be quiet, because I have to have that conversation with someone that I don't enjoy. I have to say, well, he's just speaking to himself at regular volume that you would speak to another person in the library. He's just doing it by himself. Then that's okay. I dread when I have to have those conversations. It's always an unpleasant job if you've got to be the person that tells a person they have to leave because they smell and that they're disturbing other people because of that. So they're really common examples of the sort of things that fit into this category, and the sort of language that library workers were using were things like, I hope no one is going to come up to me so I have to solve this. I don't enjoy this, or I dread this, or this is a really unpleasant job. Now, the second type of behaviours that we're seeing in libraries fall into the second category here of disruptive or threatening. So this is getting much more challenging to deal with. These are actively disrupting the library environment. They're threatening people. They can be loud, they can be shouty, they can take their clothes off, they mutter threats to people, and they cause a lot of anxiety because of their unpredictability. And you know that you have to keep your eye on them constantly because you don't know what they're going to do next. And that creates a lot of anxiety for other library users as well as library staff. So examples of this from the interviews: he made us feel uncomfortable because he was unpredictable. One day you could have quite a pleasant conversation with him, but you didn't know how he was going to be the next day. It's scary for us too sometimes. We get the occasional threat or just people talking about some really disturbing things involving murdering children or whatever. But that comes with the territory of being in a public space and working with the public. We would have customers make comments like, should I be fearful for my life? Or is he okay? Because he'd say things to himself like, I'm going to kill you. And there was one incident where he started yelling at one of the customers because she looked at him over a computer. I was doing story time with babies, and afterwards a mother with her baby came up and said, that man over there, he's been touching himself. He was an older white man. I went outside and spoke with the librarians, and the systems librarian got onto the CCTV, and he had been. He was looking at babies and masturbating. The police came and took him away. That one kind of got to me. So the sort of language you're hearing there is things about things being uncomfortable and unpredictable and scary and threatening. And this statement of, that one kind of got to me. But there's also this really common thread of, well, that's just library work. It's this sort of acceptance of it almost. Now, the third one is the violent people. violent behaviours. So this is obviously the most serious ones. It's people who commit or attempt to commit violent acts towards library staff or to other users or even to themselves. Within the study, there was things like physical assaults, there was spitting, aggressive verbal attacks, throwing of furniture, all sorts of quite violent and frightening activities. These are obviously an immediate threat to people's physical safety, and they can have extremely long-lasting emotional impacts on the library staff and the other users who have been witness to these things. So examples from the interviews. I was spat on once in my face in the morning because of my uniform. Someone hit me with a glass. She got really angry and started hitting that on my face, and another staff member grabbed it. I was shaken with that because no one has ever hit me with something before. That incident was so hard. An elderly gentleman, quite a frail gentleman, was on the ground and there was a man standing over him with his fists raised. I was so shocked that someone was yelling and swearing and physically assaulting someone else in front of me. When I was talking to one of my team yesterday about it, he'd dealt with an individual who had twice threatened him with assault and was screaming in his face and stuff the other week. He became extremely aggressive and threatened all sorts of nasty things to a staff member. They had to call the police, and now he's on a banned register. So the sort of language we're hearing there is like people being really angry and physical assault, people feeling threatened, people screaming in the library, really aggressive, shocking activities that the library staff are either witnessing or becoming caught up within. In my conversations with public library workers, since I did this survey, I've been told about incidents where library workers have been hit, stabbed, followed home by men, chased to their cars at the end of a shift, have had their lives threatened, and one who was hit in the face with a chair. And these are just pretty typical public library activities that go on that our library workers have to put up with. So when it comes to the emotional toll on library workers, of course, it's no surprise that these sort of things happening as part of your work life takes a significant toll on library workers. And one of the questions I asked during my interviews was, what sort of impact is this having on you personally? And the sort of things that I was hearing, this again, some quotes from the interviews, little traumas turn into one big trauma. And I had a bit of a meltdown and then came right back again, but it was just too many of them. Over 10 years, there's just been too many things happen. It's the build-up with the situations that have happened. I feel like it's a whole lot of little traumas that are turning into a bigger trauma. I'm starting to feel sometimes that I get quite anxious now at approaching someone that I have to if they're aggressive, because what are they going to do? You have to be careful. So I feel probably a lot more unprotected than I used to, as in physically. It can be a bit overwhelming sometimes in situations where you know that there's no fixing it, that there's nothing you or anyone else can do that's going to fix the problem. That can be quite overwhelming. I've got a backlog of shit like this in my mind, library stuff. That's why I'm a bit upset, because it's stress that just accumulates and we carry it around and it just gets added to. Nothing gets taken out. Yeah, it's tough. It's so tiring. We've all got stress. We've all got anxiety. So you might remember that I interviewed 59 staff members and all but one of them cried when I asked that question of what impact is this having on you, having to come to work and put up with this stuff. Every single one of them, apart from one woman, didn't cried a lot. And they were crying for themselves, but they were also crying for the staff that they supervise. There's an enormous toll on library supervisors who see this stuff happening to their front of house staff and feel powerless to be able to protect them. And seeing your staff become unraveled because of these situations is very, very hard to watch when you feel powerless as a supervisor. Okay, you can pop back in now if you have been sticking out of those slides. We're back without hearing the nasty stories. Okay, so the sort of challenges that we're seeing in public libraries, and I suspect also in academic libraries, is a normalisation of these traumatic events. We heard people saying, well, that's just what library work is like. When you work with the public, you've got to expect this sort of stuff. We've become so used to it that it is now part of our normal. And I think it is quite shocking to me that that this can be considered a normal and acceptable part of public service work. I've also heard that there's a great lack of workplace support. Everybody seems to have, like an EAP, or they might have a couple of processes that they use within their workplace, but none of them are sufficient or would last for long enough to be of use to people. You heard, one was a man who said, after 10 years, this is really starting to get under my skin. And often the sort of workplace supports just don't have that sort of longevity across the trauma that people carry with them. Essentially, we've got this tension between an open door policy and staff safety. Our public libraries, and I think a lot of our academic libraries too, are just, they're open to anyone, and that's part of our ethos as public libraries anyway, that these are places for everybody. The problem with having the front door open to everybody is that everybody will come in and they'll bring all their social problems and with them. So we do get anything that's happening outside the library, we're seeing inside the library, and the library staff are the ones who are trying to manage these behaviours and keep themselves and their other users safe. We're seeing a really high risk of burnout and staff turnover. I did a survey of a public library, quite a big network of public libraries in country Victoria, and I asked a question of them there, have you considered looking for work elsewhere? And almost 50% said, yeah, as soon as I can find something else, I'm out of here. This is not what I signed up for and I'm not happy. So we've got a real problem. If we've got half of our workforce trying to get out, that's a real problem for our profession and for our libraries. So this is certainly not a unique situation for Australia. A group of library workers in the US that call themselves Urban Librarians Unite, and they've got a little logo there that looks a lot like Ned Kelly, but I can assure you it's not about Ned Kelly. They did a big study, a bit like the one that I've done, but of US libraries, and they were hearing the same sort of stories. And what they came up with was this model that they've called the library trauma cycle, which is trying to explain what's going on in libraries and the effect that it's having on our library staff. So I'm just going to take you really briefly through these three stages, and then we'll have a quick look at the first two in particular. So the first thing at the top of the cycle there is the outside stressor. This is where you've got the stuff that's coming in the door, essentially. This is the stuff that's coming from the outside into the inside of the library and is causing the problem. So it's the challenging behaviour. It's also stuff like the architecture of a library. If you've got really poor sight lines within your library space and you can't see what's going on out down the back, that can create a stress as well, because it might be a scary thing for a library staff member to work or walk up there. Or it might be that other library users are not safe because you can't see what's going on with them. So that's the idea of the outside stressor, things that are coming in that we actually don't have very much control over. As long as we've got our open door policies, we're going to keep getting this stuff coming through the front door. There are some ways that we can work with that. Security guards are really common in public libraries now. All public libraries are encouraged to fill out incident reports every time somebody kicks off and does something horrendous to somebody else, or even just is, shouty and thoroughly unpleasant and upsets people. They fill out an incident report. They are starting to do things like trying to get their local counsellors to come and spend a day working in the library. Like every Wednesday, come in, do your work from the library, and you can see what we put up with, because the counsellors are the ones holding the money, and they are the ones who are going to try and that they're trying to get to encourage to, put more money into security or CCTV, or to change the lighting in the library or whatever. CCTV is obviously a really good one. You can see who's coming in, but it's only useful to really spot people after something's happened, to try and identify who they were. Although the other day I was in the Melbourne City Library in Flinders Lane, and there was a kid he looked about 6, I reckon, and he was on his own walking around the library all by himself, and there was this man following him, and they clearly weren't related, because they're obviously from different cultures. And the library staff were monitoring the CCTV, and they said, look, there's a problem. There's a kid up there and there's this guy walking around behind him watching him. And so they sent somebody up and sat with the kid until the parent turned back up. So CCTV is a really good one to try and help with keeping people safe. Public libraries are also looking at improved communication between service providers. Particularly, this works really well in some of the regional towns where sometimes they have a good relationship with, say, Centrelink, and Centrelink might ring the library and say, hey, Joe, who kicked off last week, he's just had a real shout at us down here and he's on his way down to you. And that will help the library get prepared for that and to put things in place to deal with that. Libraries often go into lockdown these days where they will shut the front doors and lock them and people can't get in or out. And that's just a way of trying to protect people who are trying to get into the building that they know are likely to cause trouble. So the second thing in this cycle here is the professional community response. This is where we can try to intervene to lessen the effects or manage the effects of the outside stressor before we move to that next stage in the cycle, the internalization. And the internalization is all that stuff that those people were feeling that I was telling you about. There's all these people carrying this trauma and stress and just tucking it in under their skin every day and coming back to work the next day. Stuff happens again, they try and push it down, tuck it under their skin, try and come back. And that internalization is what leads to burnout and to people wanting to work somewhere else, and for people not being able to contain their tears when someone asks if they're okay. So if we can get the professional community response right, we might have a better chance of reducing that movement through to the internalization of trauma. There are some ways that libraries are working towards trying to improve their professional community response. They're writing clear policies and procedures about what's acceptable and what's not, what you need to do to try and protect yourself, when it's okay to call the police, all sorts of different policies and procedures that outline what's okay and what's not okay and how to respond when things get bad. They're trying to improve their reporting system. So some of the incident reports now are taking still photographs from the CCTV monitors to try and capture people's faces in the incident reports. Managers are doing desk shifts. So instead of sitting out the back and just sort of hearing about this stuff, they're out there trying to understand it and see it firsthand, and also provide support to their other staff by being present. And then what I was saying about the visibility of library spaces, there was a lady in Queensland who talked about her no, it wasn't academic, it was a public library, and they had really poor visibility of most of the shelving in the building. And I know you guys will often have that too, because you've got multiple levels on a lot of your libraries. I'm just thinking back to Melbourne Uni, where a lot of it is really quite unattended you can't really see it very well. But if you can improve the visibility of library spaces, there's an opportunity to perhaps keep people a bit safer, because you can keep an eye on what people are up to. Purposeful rostering is an interesting one, and that's an idea of never having somebody on their own in a library, which is really hard when you've got a tiny little library in a tiny little town, for example. It can also be things like make sure you've got 2 people in the building at lockup time, so no one's on their own. It's also things like, a lot of public libraries now are having those 24-hour opening where people will get a card and they'll be allowed to let themselves in outside of the operating hours, the staffed operating hours. Often now what library staff are finding is they're frightened about coming in the morning because they don't know who's in the building. So they're doing things like making sure 2 people are coming in at once rather than someone going into the library on their own. Also, training obviously is really important. Training managers in debriefings to try and talk people down before things get bad. Peer support groups across libraries and staff training. And I'll have a little bit more to say about training in a minute, but these are things that I think all libraries are probably doing. So in terms of the professional community response, there's other ways as well. There's this idea of self-care, which I'm really conflicted about, because I think if the workplace was safer, you wouldn't need to be responsible for your own well-being in this way or trying to repair yourself. But there are lots of options for sort of self-care things. This idea of the EAPs, I had quite a few people say to me, if someone says EAP to me one more time, I'm going to scream, because it was like the thing, anytime something went wrong, the manager would go, well, you've got EAP for that. And they really weren't finding that they were very effective, or that they were a very good take-up rate of those EAP things that you could do. But obviously, in library managers who normalize self-care rather than making it feel like you're a burden if you ask for some time off, or if you do want to engage in some form of self-care that is a result of the behaviour of people at work. Is an interesting example. I've got a friend who works in Hamburg in Germany, and she said it's normal in their workplaces, in the libraries, that if you have an incident, or if you're feeling stressed, or you've been working for a very long time and you're starting to feel some burnout, that you can take a month of mental health leave at full pay, and your workplace will pay for you to go to like these sort of health farm things. And she went to one, and she was doing painting, and she was doing forest walking, and she did a lot of yoga, and all these fabulous sort of examples of looking after herself at the expense of her workplace and on work time. So I can't see that happening anytime soon, but what a lovely idea that would be. I think it's important that these sort of sustainable practices that people are encouraged to put in place for self-care should occur during work time as well as at home, because I think the responsibility for caring for the worker really needs to belong to the workplace, not just to the worker themselves. It's not your fault that these things happen to you. It's the workplace's fault that this happened. So why is it your responsibility to try and fix yourself? That's just my little rant on that one. So we can't decide who comes to our doors. We can't fix the problems of society that come in because our doors are open to everyone. Those external stresses are always going to keep coming in. We need to work out how we can maintain the safety of our staff and visitors in an increasingly volatile environment. I believe it should not be the responsibility of the individual worker to maintain their own well-being without the workplace making systemic changes. And we need to work out what those systemic and workplace changes might be. And that's an AI generated picture. It's pretty cool, isn't it? I'd go to that library. Okay, so this allows us to concentrate on the professional community response stage in the library trauma cycle. Given that we have very little control over the outside stressor, what's coming into the building, perhaps the stage that we can have the most control over and the most potential impact on staff wellbeing is this professional community response. So I'm going to spend a few minutes now looking at some of the resources that might be helpful for public and academic libraries to do a better job at that professional community response stage in the cycle, to try and reduce the impact of challenging behaviours and to put things in place to stop or reduce the trauma experienced by library workers from being internalised as that third stage in that cycle. So I did some searching for resources online, and there's actually quite a lot out there that's actually tailored for managing a library job, managing the stress of a library job. This one on the left is an e-course that you can do. It was dated 2017, but it still exists. You can download it, and it's a course on about how to handle stress and thrive under pressure. There's a book on the right-hand side there called The Mindful Librarian, Connecting the Practice of Mindfulness to Librarianship. There's also another book called Becoming a Reflective Librarian and Teacher. I thought this must be relevant to you guys because you're being librarians, but also a lot of you have a teaching role, so maybe thought that might be relevant. So these things are good. Like there's a heap of them out there, all these books and resources and training and all sorts of stuff that you can do about sort of mindfulness and reflective practice and that sort of thing. But I think they are of little use to you when someone's coming at you with a chair or someone's throwing things at you or yelling at you. They're probably useful as a form of recovery from these incidents, but actually managing the traumatic experience as it's happening, I think these things would be of less use. There's this book, though, that is written by, well, it's published by the United States Public Library Association, and that's the contents page there for it. And there's some stuff in there that I think actually might be a bit more useful to have in your head as these things are happening, particularly for public libraries. I don't know, maybe you guys as well. So that's an option as well. There's another book that's written really recently by this lady, Margaret Ann Powell, and she is an American social worker, which sort of brings in this whole idea of social workers in libraries, which you've probably heard a ton about from the public library sector. But there's chapters in there about understanding trauma, understanding mental illness, de-escalation techniques, debriefing staff after an incident. There's a chapter titled Recognizing the Emotional Impact of Library Work. Now, I haven't seen this book yet. It was only available in the US in June 2025, and I'm not sure if it's even out in Australia yet, but that might be an interesting one to keep an eye on as well, because I think it is more of a practical toolkit. And I think she's got some like some appendices in there with actual sort of toolkits type things in it, and some like scripts that you can keep in your head as you're trying to talk somebody down. So that might be a useful one to have a look at. There's this book by my gorgeous friend Beth Waller. She has written a book called Creating a Person-Centered Library, and these are the headings of the chapters there, 1 to 7. And there's also these appendix things within the book that I've got some like some tools that you can use to do like self-assessments of what your patrons are doing or might need, what your staff might need, what training might be beneficial for staff. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there. But again, it's pretty much focused on public libraries, but it has some useful stuff in there about addressing patron needs, but also chapter 6 there, organising approaches for best supporting staff. That I think is a really useful chapter and worth having a look at in terms of looking after the well-being of the staff. Beth has just released, I feel like her marketing agent, but I'm not, but she's just released a bunch of online training, and you can see them listed there. There's a couple of the Australian public libraries have bought access to these, and there's a whole bunch of Americans that have, of course. But these are online asynchronous training modules that you can take yourself through, and they have lots of information in there. I haven't seen them yet, but apparently they're very good for helping with sort of diffusing situations, debriefing afterwards, reducing and responding to workplace trauma. So that's something else to keep in mind as well. So beyond professional reading and developing staff skills to help them manage the impacts of their workplace, there are some interesting resources that encourage libraries to reframe their thinking about how to manage people behaving badly in our libraries. And obviously this is not relevant if someone's trying to stab you, but if you've just got people who are being difficult, so maybe the first 2 of those categories of challenging behaviours rather than the third one where you just try and get out of the way. This guy, Cormac Russell, he has a TED Talk. He is the founding director of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute in Chicago. His argument is that to solve a problem, instead of focusing on the problem and what's wrong or not working, we should focus on what is working well, where the strengths are in the situation that you're trying to solve. So to place this idea into a library environment, you might talk to the people who have caused you trouble about why they're in the library. What is the library? What are they here? What is it about the library that's working well for them? Ask them what do they need from the library to make it better and a more comfortable place for them. Then see if you can find a way for them to contribute to making those changes. There's an example of a library doing this sort of work in a couple of slides' time. So I'll just tell you about that when I get to that, because it's also a bit of a trigger warning there. Another example of this idea of sort of inviting in the people that are causing you trouble. This guy, Stephen Jackson, we interviewed him on our podcast. Beth Waller and I have a podcast called Surviving the Stacks, which is all about traumatic events in libraries and how to try and manage them better. We're about to start recording our second series, which is a bit of fun. But he's had the same idea. So he was talking about young people who are coming into the libraries and causing a whole lot of trouble. Maybe some of you guys have got the similar situation if you're near high schools, perhaps. And he was saying, instead of saying to these young people, you're causing disruption and problems in the library, he reached out to them and said, well, what is it about the library that you like? Why are you here? And what can we do to make it more important and more useful and a better place for you? And then he had those people working together as a working and advisory group to try and put things in place to make the library a better place for them, where they were less likely to be disruptive and actually to value the place more. So the next slide is an example of this in action, this inviting people in who are causing issues, but there is a suicide mention in this slide I'm about to show you. So if that's something you'd rather not see, please just step away for this one slide. So this is an example of an initiative led by members of the homeless community in Melbourne. The library, this is one of the Melbourne City libraries, they partner with an organisation called CoHealth, which has been in the news recently because they're running out of money, unfortunately. And they are working on this project with people experiencing homelessness in the library to produce a zine for other people in Melbourne who are also experiencing homelessness. So the authors and designers of this zine were already in the library. They're people experiencing homelessness. They were already in the library, and they wanted to get a break from the streets and just to stay warm. They wanted to help others in their positions, so the library have given them a room to meet. They have given them editorial assistance, and they photocopy these zines for them. And they make these gorgeous little zines. They're just tiny little things that unfold, and they've got all these stories and resources on the inside and lists of what services are available in the local area. So the group comes together, they work on these, the library helps them edit it, they photocopy it, and then they all come together and they fold them up, and then the people go out and distribute them to other people experiencing homelessness. So it's just a really nice way of inviting in a group that were potentially problematic for the library and saying, okay, let's work together and make something fabulous together. And that's working beautifully for the library and for that community as well. So to finish off, I thought it might be useful to have a look at what some other industries are doing who are working directly with the public to protect their staff through their professional community response to those outside stresses. The Department of Health, Victorian Department of Health, they have a jurisdiction that includes workers in public health settings like the public hospitals, obviously, but also government-run health clinics, safe injecting rooms, and other sort of government-run or funded health clinics. They base all their violence and aggression training on 7 different principles, which you can see there. So these are training principles that are set at a departmental level that each health service is required to implement in their workplaces. There are different principles for different roles in the health services. There are core principles that everybody has to receive training in, and there are separate principles for clinical staff, for supervisors, for security staff, and non-clinical staff. And I thought this was interesting because I know universities have a whole range of sort of tiers of staff as well, some of whom never get near sort of front of house, and some of whom spend all their time in the front of house. So I like this idea of having, these are the principles about how we're going to deliver training, but they will then be interpreted differently for different groups of people depending on the nature of their work. So they use these sort of differentiated principles to decide who needs what training. So these are the sort of skills training that are offered to Department of Health workers depending on their needs based on the nature of their job. They also divide their training strategies into 3 tiers and provide standards for training against each tier. So tier 1 requires what is known as primary strategies. These include making sure staff are aware of the legal frameworks and policies that protect people in the workplace, reviewing the environment for safety issues, learning how to recognise a deterioration in a person's engagement with others. So that really sort of high level view. Tier 2 is secondary strategies. These include more hands-on stuff like de-escalation skills, assertive communication skills, developing processes and practices for staff to support each other if violence seems likely. So what do you do when someone starts to kick off? How do you look after each other? And tier 3, these are tertiary strategies. These include training of security and other staff to know what they can and can't do in response to violence. knowing what responsibilities staff have for the safety of others, knowing what procedures must be worked through after an incident has occurred. So obviously this is an example tailored to the needs of healthcare workers, but I think I like this idea of having different tiers of training depending on what your particular needs are, depending on your job role. Within the industry, the State Library of Victoria, I know they are having a lot of problems with challenging behaviours of people, and I know that their front of house staff are now wearing duress alarms that they can hit each time they get hurt or attacked or someone is threatening them, and that will bring other staff to the area, and there'll be a response will be sparked from that hitting that alarm. And obviously, security guards are now really common in public libraries, and maybe they are in academic libraries too. I'm not sure, but they're certainly extremely common in public libraries. When I was in the US earlier this year, I visited a library in Arizona, and they have a staff member who is dedicated to caring for staff because of all the incidents that were going on in the workplace. She set up this get well room for library staff to spend time in to decompress and just to have a break away from the front of house after incidents have occurred. So the staff can put on soft lighting. There's a music player there. There are like little fiddle toys for anxiety. There are fresh sheets and blankets so staff can lie down, turn the lights off and have a rest if they just need to decompress and get themselves back together after an incident's occurred. So, in conclusion, there are significant safety issues in our libraries, both public and I believe also academic libraries. To address these issues, we need to approach the problem in multiple ways, perhaps with a focus on how we can create an effective professional community response to help prevent staff from coming to harm and from internalising that harm. Libraries need to balance their mission of service and open doors, whether it be to the public or to the university community, with the need to protect the workforce and to provide a workplace that does not create harm for the people who spend time there. This is a genuinely difficult task, and I hope you've found this presentation of use in sharing ways to think about the issue and some pathways to possible solutions. Thank you very much for listening.
Oh, thank you so much, Jane, for sharing your fascinating work and research with us, as well as sharing some of the useful tools and resources. It's clearly a very popular topic, judging by the varying questions that have come in throughout your presentation. So let's go through a few questions before our break, starting with the most upvoted. So our first question is, so a theme that stood out for me was a sense that some staff felt this is just part of public library work. How do we start shifting that cultural narrative so that trauma and abuse are seen as unacceptable rather than an inevitable part of the job?
Yeah, good question. I think it's got to start well, I think it probably should start at the national level. ALIA have a responsibility to the profession. Perhaps there needs to be some guidelines about that. Well, some not saying that this is not normal from a national level, but I think probably more effectively it will be within the workplace. It'll be your own direct manager or your own CEO or your branch manager or whatever it is, the language that you use. They are the ones who are responsible for you, and they are the ones who are responsible for the environment in which you work in. And if they make it clear that what's happening is intolerable, then that sets the tone for everybody else. And I think they're the ones that we have to change. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes I'll hear people in that sort of level sort of saying, well, they just need to toughen up. Like, this is library work. It was always like this when I was young. It was like this too. And I think that narrative has to change. We've got to say this is not okay, and it has to come from that level, and that will then set the tone for the rest of the workforce, I think.
Okay, great. Thank you. And the second question is the most voted question is, so this may be addressed later, but I wondered how challenging you found these interviews and how you dealt with any negative effects on yourself. And this kind of research can be personally, emotionally challenging for people to tackle.
Yeah, it's a good question. No one's ever asked me that before. It changes you. You do this research and it definitely changes. It has changed me. It increases your awareness, but also the hearing people's trauma is traumatic. It's hard. I think what I do when I finish interviews, I always go back to my hotel or wherever I'm staying and I'll have a shower and I'll just try and wash it off. But I write it away. I journal the day, but then I'll also translate it into scholarly articles and try and share it with the profession. And I think for me, being able to move it from my head to the page is beneficial in making sure that I don't tuck it under my skin and get sort of internalize that other people's trauma. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jane. And the third question is there any emerging evidence on the effectiveness or appropriateness of security personnel or other environmental safety measures in libraries?
Yeah, security guards are a really, really challenging topic because they can be fabulous. They can make staff feel safer, and they can also make other library users feel safer because they think, oh, if something happens, at least that person's over there. But it can also be intimidating for people. If people come into the library and the first thing they see is a guy in a stab vest, that's quite like, do you really want your kid in there? Like, what goes on in that place that they need someone at their door, like looking like that? So there's a real balance to be made. I think where it works well is where you've got people who don't wear stab vests, but wear library uniforms, but have a security function. They are not the first thing you see when you walk in, so they might be tucked around the side, but have really good sight lines. Things I've seen work really well in some of the remote and regional libraries where there's a high Indigenous population is they'll have a person from the community being the security guard, so they know what's going on and they know the people who are coming in and the people come in know them, and that works really well. I think security guards are probably a necessary evil, and they're not always effective because sometimes they're not allowed to touch the people. They like someone might be doing something dreadful, but they're not legally allowed to restrain them. So all they can do is just try and talk them down or try and stand between the trouble and the library staff or other library users and call the police. And the police are allowed to touch them. So in some ways they're a visual deterrent, but you don't really want them to be the first thing people see. So yeah, it's a really difficult issue with security guards.
Mm. Yes, I'm just mindful of the time. There are other questions there as well, but so just wondering, if I encourage, all the others that have put in their thoughtful questions through the Q&A. We can't get to all of them today. We, however, encourage you to continue the conversation with Jane maybe afterwards, after today's session.
Yeah, for sure. You can email me or catch me on LinkedIn. We'd be good to keep talking.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very interesting topic. Thank you so much, Jane, for the time and effort you put into preparing the keynote and delivering such a strong presentation today. And I also appreciate for answering the questions from the audience. We will now go for a quick 4-minute break, and my colleague, Sarah Farrugia, Information Resources Officer at Victoria University, we'll welcome you back to the session at 3:05 p.m. So that will be 2:05 p.m. for those of you in Queensland. See you then.
So hopefully you've had enough time to get up and have a bit of a stretch, step away from your device for a moment, rest your eyes. We've got a lot more in store for you. Like throughout the keynote, if you've got any questions during the upcoming Pecha Kucha and lightning talk, please submit them through the Q&A function, and I'll facilitate the Q&A after the two presentations. First up, we invite Ennis Chen, Library Assistant at Australian Catholic University Library, to the virtual stage. For Ennis's and the other speakers' full biographies, please visit the website linked in the chat. We're keeping the introductions here short so we can maximise presentation time. Ennis's Pecha Kucha will share her personal experiences as an early career library professional. Welcome, Ennis.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Ennis, and I'll be speaking to you all today from Wongal country, a part of broader Eora Nation from Sydney. I'll just share my screen quickly. Sometimes I still don't feel like a librarian yet. So is there anyone else here who feels or has felt the same way? This is me, by the way, doing one of the things I love doing the most, which is exploring the great outdoors. I've long told myself that I don't feel like a librarian because I only have a graduate diploma in librarianship, or that I'm only ever officially an assistant to be considered an actual librarian. And this leads to a lot of imposter syndrome, worrying if my input is important enough to be taken seriously. But I want everyone here to feel like there's a space for them in librarianship. After all, don't we say that libraries are for all? Yes, I may not have all the answers, but we still have a unique mix of skills, insight, and experiences, like good bowls of soup. And this helped me realize that I don't have to achieve everything today or do it all myself to feel like a real librarian. But first, what brought me here to libraries? Well, I did all sorts of customer service roles before I landed here, with one of them surprisingly being a games host at Luna Park. Here, I learned how to juggle, no pun intended, working with a diverse range of people. Similarly, I would get pretty good at working under pressure when I was in public hospital admin during the height of COVID and when I did pickpacking for Lush. All these lessons I've learned from every non-library place that I've worked and volunteered at over the years would be indispensable for when I did finally work in libraries. And I would land my first library gig back in 2019 as an assistant for City of Sydney Council before finding myself in public library programming at Inner West Council in 2023. From then onwards, I've been putting my combined skills and experiences to good use at ACU, as I learned to be continually adaptive, patient, open-minded, and resilient, all qualities that I think librarians embody wonderfully. As much as I enjoyed trying all kinds of work, it was in libraries when I first felt, hey, I think I belong here. When I tell people I'm a librarian, they're usually curious to learn more. And this makes me feel good about the work I do. But for longer than I dared to admit, I was kind of embarrassed about the assistant part of my job titles. And this would largely be due to my cousin saying to me a few years ago, no offense, but what exactly is it that you do in a library? Not to be dramatic, but his words would kind of haunt me as I felt this misplaced need to prove to him that I did quote unquote important work. Now, I try not to judge myself too harshly for feeling or thinking this way. This desire to do more, I feel like, has constantly been drummed into us. On the upside, it's what partly led my jump from public to academic libraries here at ACU. But when I ended up second-guessing whether I made the right decision by taking this leap, I eventually turned to my manager here for advice. I expressed to her how I've barely scraped the surface of my career, how it feels like a personal failure sometimes for not getting certain job opportunities or moving at a seemingly slower pace than the rest of my peers. But I just kept coming back to libraries. So my manager asked, what is it about libraries that keeps me coming back? I said to her simply that I like to help others. Isn't this the same for many of you out here? She encouraged me to dig a little deeper because in the same way I like to help people, the same could be said about firefighters, teachers, nurses. But I just knew that working in libraries felt worthwhile and meaningful to me. Although I still have my doubts from time to time, I feel more included in the wider library community each year by putting my hand up for opportunities like this seminar, like the Cavell mentoring program. What kept feeding my imposter syndrome was believing I was alone and feeling inadequate. But opening up more helped me realize that library folk are generally so willing to uplift each other. I also just like what I do in libraries. In libraries, I get to help people find information that they're looking for, even when they don't know what they're looking for. I currently help staff the library chat service, and it makes me feel like a detective trying to get to the bottom of a case. In libraries, I also get to help people find and think critically about information themselves. And this scratches an itch of mine that enjoys teaching, enjoys guiding others, so they feel more empowered to find the answers on their own. In libraries, I feel like we are in the thick of what it means to live in the information age. I feel like libraries have always been poised in a really interesting position where we're helping shape the future of information, the future of teaching and learning, but now more than ever before. And this sort of dynamism keeps libraries endlessly interesting for me. But if I'm completely honest, this same dynamism also kind of terrifies me. I feel like technology just keeps changing the way we interact and use information faster than we can keep up, especially in the world of academia. Like how Gen AI is rapidly changing how we and our students interact with everything from fabricated journal articles to ethically vague AI summaries in Google searches. It's, for a lack of a better word, crazy time to be in libraries right now, as AI gets harder, better, faster, stronger, to quote Daft Punk, what's left of the humans in this field, in any field. I think this is where asking ourselves the question, what kind of librarian do I wish to be, is ever more important in the face of technological disruption. Even if algorithms are more productive than us, I still believe that library staff are fundamental to libraries. Without the human expertise we provide, I believe libraries are just a physical space, are just the resources that we give access to. So I want to end my talk by sharing what kind of librarian I wish to be. I wish to be a librarian who remains curious, because libraries are all about lifelong learning, as cliche as this sounds. I wish to be a librarian who remains hopeful despite the challenges ahead. I wish to be a librarian who continues to welcome and uplift my colleagues around me. What kind of librarian do you all wish to be? And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Ennis. That was a really touching reflection at the end there. And I think we can definitely all relate to the imposter syndrome. And it's nice to see the human side of libraries and librarianship. So next up, we'll hear a lightning talk from Sarah Sherman, Manager Scholarly Resources, and Dr Paula Muraca, Scholarly Information Services Librarian, both from Victoria University Library. They'll tell us about their approach to a project seeking to transform collection metadata to be more inclusive and responsive to First Nations epistemes. Over to you, Sarah and Paula.
So our session today is on reading in community and what that means for us. I know there's already been an acknowledgement of country, and I just wanted to again acknowledge country and acknowledge the ancestors, elders and families of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of our university land at VU. We also acknowledge all traditional owners of country throughout Victoria and pay our respects to their cultures and their elders past, present and future. As we share our knowledge and practices within the university, we pay respect to the deep knowledge embedded in the Aboriginal community and their ownership of country. We acknowledge the land on which we meet is a place of age-old ceremony and celebration, initiation and renewal, and the Kulin people's living culture has a unique role in the life of this region. And I also wanted to just acknowledge too that the recent treaty in Victoria and hoping that that is a beginning of some better relationships. Just wanted to also talk about the background of the book club. So the book club is actually a sort of project between Mundani Barlick, which is the academic integrity unit here. So it's in the Indigenous Academic Centre, sorry. And Mundani actually means embrace people in the language of the Wurundjeri people who first lived in this area of Melbourne. So each year, Mundani works to gauge interest in the book club with the equity team, and they open it to everybody. So it's a really diverse mix that can put their hands up, and it makes a great opportunity for us to meet different people across the university. So the book is actually written by Claire Land, who is an academic here at VU, and it was part of her thesis when she was actually studying as well. So she is a non-Indigenous woman, and she wrote this book to sort of help other non-Indigenous people understand and unpack some of the issues coming from this sort of background. So I personally joined this to grow my understanding at a personal level of Indigenous history, mostly because one of the things that I'm doing, and we mentioned in the title, is around metadata in a reparative angle, in terms of making sure that the library's collections are actually findable, including things like IATSIS headings. But I feel like a lot of the metadata work that we've talked about in this space is very much on a how-to and not a why, or understanding the history of what we're trying to do in this space, more just practical outcomes. And so I wanted to kind of go a bit further than that, which is why I nominated personally. And I'm just going to hand over to Paula now to speak next.
As Sarah mentioned, we all joined this book club for kind of to learn a little bit more about solidarity in general, but in particular solidarity from non-Indigenous peoples with Aboriginal justice issues. The book itself is really situated in southeastern Australian Aboriginal justice issues, and so it's very much contextualised in that space where we are. And so I guess what we wanted to share with you today is just a couple of quick insights that we've learned so far. We're not through the book club. We're about 3/4 through, would you say? Mm-hmm. And so we've already kind of learnt quite a few things. Obviously, the book itself is incredibly informative, and so is the discussions around it. It has a lot of its insights are kind of built from doing historical analysis of non-Indigenous solidarity movements with Aboriginal justice, as well as doing interviews with activists from lots of different kind of groups. So it's a very rich text. But I guess what we wanted to say here is that the act of kind of reading together with people that we really don't know and who are from really different parts of the university is itself kind of its own learning about solidarity. And so there's kind of two tracks to learning about solidarity that we've kind of developed from our experiences of this club. And that's the book and then the experience. Next slide. So one of the things that I find have an idea that's really helped to unpack the book club experience for me is Robin Zen's idea of prefigurative solidarity. It's this kind of sense that we're already in a relationship towards justice as a group of people. So in that sense, the very kind of premise of our relationship that we've entered into is to advance justice in some way. So we already have this kind of prefigurative solidaris kind of relationship. But the reality is that we're really, as Sarah mentioned, we're really different people. And we don't have necessarily the same sense of justice. And we don't have the same aims, and we certainly don't have the same understanding of book. So it's kind of a unique situation. It's quite different to any kind of activist movement that you might kind of connect to because, yeah, there's no kind of value glue apart from the fact that we're all there to learn and to learn about being good, solidarist people. So yeah, it's kind of a unique situation. But despite all the differences and the very different kind of readers that we have kind of managed to have this collective learning experience.
Yeah, so for me, it was quite interesting because, obviously I came in it for my personal reasons, and it was actually interesting because we had different members say different things. One was specifically focused on why it was that she was looking back at her career and the way she had worked with Indigenous people before and kind of reflecting on that and saying, I probably could have done a better job. I didn't have some of this background. And then we also had someone else who was very much looking for like a how-to guide of how do I be a good ally? How do I make sure I do the right thing? And wanted very clear-cut answers, which I think the book really showed there aren't clear-cut answers. Some of those chapters can be quite intense of, even just unpacking one word or two words of language.
So we just wanted to share really quickly 3 brief lessons that we've kind of learnt so far. And the first one is I'm sure you can all imagine, we profoundly underestimated the amount of learning that we would need to do to really think about inserting ourselves in complex and long-fought issue areas. And what we really learned is that it's not just about learning about the issue or about Aboriginal action in a particular issue area. It's about learning what non-Indigenous peoples like ourselves have been doing over kind of hundreds of years in these spaces of attempted allyship. And so that's a lot of kind of work that I think for some of us has been quite daunting to think about. And a second lesson is that because we're quite different, as I mentioned, like the act of book clubbing itself has forced us to extend our communicative abilities. So we don't, at least myself, I don't often talk about kind of political fraught issues with people that are not like me that often. And so I think it's extending that kind of discursive circles and not just talking, but really listening and trying to understand people's experiences and connect, or at least just accompany them in a kind of meaningful way is interesting. And I think an important skill if we're trying to learn how to be good in solidarity. And I guess the third and last point we wanted to make, and thank you again for your patience with our fumbling technological, is that one of the things that we did all have in common, because, we did have lots of different experiences of racialization ourselves in the group, but one of the things we all had in common is we have this kind of, I guess, non-Indigenous privilege as in terms of our relationship with colonization and settled lands, because we could all, to some extent, casually choose our commitment to an issue, right? So we could, and we had all had experiences that were quite similar where we would dip in and out of activism or allyship, and dip out when it was, inconvenient. And I think that the book talks about that. We spoke about that, and yeah, and so I guess one of the things that we learned, and I kind of connected this to Haraway's idea of staying with the trouble. And in fact, there are a few of Haraway's ideas that I thought were really helpful to unpack this book club experience. One of them is the main one for me is robust ongoingness. So this idea that it's not really about outcomes, and like Sarah said, it's not about like wanting to be told how to do something right and learning how to do something right. It's what's kind of been quite important is to just stay with the issue, build connectivity with really different people. And there, Haraway's idea of Odkin is kind of helpful as well. And stay committed to building that connectivity and learning. So yeah, that's all from us. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Paula, for this insight into the book club, and transformative metadata project. I think you're exactly right, Paula. This is an ongoing learning experience, and it should be a lifelong learning experience. And there is no prescriptive way to be a good ally. It's a continuous journey. We've had a few questions come through. I'm just going to ask the most upvoted question, one for each presentation, just because we're a little bit short on time. So for Ennis, from personal experience, imposter syndrome never really goes away. I wonder if the mentorship program has helped at all.
Yeah, definitely agree to how it never really goes away. It kind of ebbs and flows with you throughout life. What was great about the mentorship experience was not only hearing from my own assigned mentor, but hearing from other mentees and other mentors in the program who have also expressed similar or the same feelings. in that way that helped. And also to know that, you know, people like my mentor, other mentors have spent a lifetime building the skills they know, the knowledge that they know. So in that way, it helps as well to not be so impatient about trying to not be an imposter right now. Yeah.
I love that answer. And for the book club, are there plans to continue the book club with other texts or to expand this approach to other areas of library work?
So the university really endorses this particular book. I think the library would like to look at doing something similar, but I think more focused on journals. I think that's something that's easier for people to engage with. So Paula did host a journal club where we read an article for International Women's Day. And there was another one recently on generative AI. So I think we need to make it more approachable for others. But for a book club like this, I think there's definitely a use to have it in a similar thing. I mean, we weren't trying to read the whole book at once. I think that's the other thing we need to acknowledge. We read 2 chapters, say. And when you talk about reading those 2 chapters, again, it was one of those things where in the book club, we actually read the book, which I know it doesn't always happen in book clubs. And some of those chapters were really hard to read. And if it wasn't in a book club, I possibly would have put it down. And, this was to remind me that, like, this is taking work and this is learning. And maybe I haven't had to do that in a while. Anything?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Sorry. So unfortunately, we'll have to leave the Q&A there, but do please continue the conversation in the chat. There's some great conversations going on in there. Thank you, Ennis, Sarah, and Paula. Our final speaker, Carl Buttler, Mai Kulan Ande Jerabena, is a liaison librarian, research data management at Federation University Australia Library, and will tell us about his unique experience of attending the International Indigenous Librarians Forum in Canada earlier this year. Sarika, who you met earlier, will facilitate the Q&A with Carl afterwards, so keep the questions coming through the Q&A function, and welcome, Carl.
Thanks so much for having me along there. Hopefully you can all see my screen and we'll kick off. So yeah, thanks so much for coming along. I'm talking about my very fortunate experience attending the International Indigenous Librarians Forum in Toronto in Canada in June this year. Before I do begin though, I always acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waters we meet. I'm here in Ballarat, so I'm on the land of the Wadawurrung. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and to any other First Nations people that might be here as well too. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands around Toronto, where I was lucky enough to go, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Anishinaabeg, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Wadat peoples as well too. So I was incredibly fortunate to be able to go along to this forum. The International Indigenous Librarians Forum has been going since 1999, and Indigenous peoples, librarians from right across the world have this incredible Indigenous-led forum where we all get to come together, share our experiences, our ideas, connect in a way where we are Indigenous peoples first and librarians second. And so where we are in a situation where we work all around the place as librarians, it's very fantastic. It's a fantastic opportunity to come together and really share culture and really be ourselves in that sort of sense. The theme that we're talking about today is belonging. So I'm really talking about my own reflections. So from this point of view, it's really about my experience as an Indigenous librarian and as an Indigenous library user as well too. This forum has been going on for quite some time. There you can see in the middle, there's the Maori stone. That's been there part of every single Indigenous Librarians Forum since its inception, and it was there in Toronto as well too. So the actual forum theme itself was a dish with one spoon. Now, this is actually a pre-contact treaty between traditional owners before Europeans even arrived in Toronto. And it's all about people only taking what they need and sharing that natural abundance with everybody around you there. And for me personally, going along to this forum there, hearing the language of treaty used so frequently and so often in every sort of aspect of people's lives across the world, particularly in the likes of North America there, even in New Zealand there as well too, it really sort of spoke to me that we have just had treaty signed here in Victoria, and it's something that we still really need to understand what it means for all of us. But this is such a groundbreaking change that it's going to be absolutely wonderful in that sense there as well. So please, as a profession, really read it, understand it, engage with it, and understand what it means for all of us, Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples of Victoria in particular. So the actual forum itself was fantastic. So what happened was day one, we were taken on a bus and we went out to the outskirts of the city there and we had a whole day on country. Had nothing to do with presentations, posters and keynote speakers and all that. We were welcomed by the chief of the Mississaugas of the Credit, and we had ceremony. There was a small smoking ceremony there with sage and tobacco. We were eating the fruits that were harvested there on the country. We wandered through country. We saw deer. We saw all these amazing animals and just felt the sounds and the feelings of everything that country had to offer there as well too. And in that moment, the people who I was speaking to were just feeling so grateful that we felt entirely welcomed onto country in that sense as a guest. And we were very, very fortunate to have that experience there. And as I was saying before, this was entirely run with an Indigenous focus from the get-go there. So all the food was locally sourced there, and traditional foods that would have been traditional ingredients, I should say, that's been around for quite some time in that area there. Everyone was wearing quite proudly their traditional dress where they could. And it was just a really incredible experience going and meeting people from all around the world in that sort of environment there as well. We were quite fortunate. So we did have some fantastic keynote speakers. So one of them was the president of the ALA, Cindy Hull, and she's actually Santee Sioux herself. So she's a Native American librarian, and she spoke to all of us talking about trying to find a good way for libraries. So what can we all do to make sure that libraries are doing the best they can to make everybody belong? Of course, that includes our Indigenous populations as well too. So she really spoke about the fact that, and you can apply this absolutely anywhere, we serve human beings, we don't serve facilities, we don't serve systems. As easy as it is to kind of focus on the sort of day-to-day, we need to get this system done, we need to make sure this space looks right, we need to make sure this collection is organised in that particular way. That's all fine, but as long as the end result is that we are serving the people who require our support, then we're on the right track there. And it's really, and she speaks about understanding that Indigenous peoples themselves do have a part to play in our libraries there. And how can that be done? From her experience being in the United States, she was talking about the horrible experiences they're going through with book bans, soft censoring, silencing voices, librarians being harassed just for doing their jobs. But then also talking about the profession of libraries itself and understanding that the way things have been done, privileging certain pieces of information, needs to be rethought in a way that includes Indigenous knowledges in that sense as well too. When it comes to academic libraries, for example, if we're supporting data management, data collection, and that sort of sense, we need to make sure that we address that in the way that doesn't just privilege a certain population, but can be collected in a way that is accurate and addresses the potential data disparity where Indigenous communities themselves may not actually be appropriately represented, and therefore outcomes may be somewhat distorted there. And that's something that she saw a lot in health research there in particular as well. So looking at ways that Indigenous peoples can be considered at every step of the way, because there will be differences to be aware of as well too. But she was very optimistic, and seeing the energy in the room there, and she did make the point that there's never been a better time to be a librarian, and it really did feel that way as well. So there were some other presentations that were taking place. So I'm just going to give a very quick couple of minutes on each one before I finish up. There was some fantastic presentations on information literacies. So adapting some information literacy frameworks that you may be familiar with. The one that they were looking at was the ACRL framework, and really trying to adapt the context and focusing conversation on cultural continuity matters there. Thinking about, if we're looking at information literacy, not just privileging peer-reviewed journal articles, trying to find ways to bring in conversations from outside the academic realm there, understanding that traditional knowledges themselves don't have time limits for when they become public domain, because they do, that Indigenous knowledges, they do have ownership within community, and that's not going to be relinquished in any way there as well. And even thinking about different pieces of information there too. Is there room for spiritual inquiry? Is there room for ceremony? Is there room for prayer? These are the sorts of things that we're not really having open conversations about. But if we want to think about how we can genuinely engage with Indigenous populations, what does that actually mean in that sort of sense there as well? There was a fantastic presentation on Indigenous data stewardship there as well. Kirsten Thorpe, Samantha Callahan, they were doing some amazing work working with AI in particular. And they were seeing a few issues there with using large language models there, and the depiction of colonial violence, and the fact that it was very difficult to actually collect appropriate appropriate data to train AI tools, because they may not have had the appropriate metadata to say where this piece of information came from, what community it was taken from there, what local Indigenous languages was it using there, and those sorts of key pieces of metadata that we may not have considered in that sense there as well. There's another presentation on intellectual, cultural, and Indigenous cultural intellectual property. And again, if we want to talk about libraries as being a place of belonging, when it comes to Indigenous knowledges there, try to change the mindset of the profession from being owners of knowledge to, in the cases of Indigenous knowledge, is thinking more about it as librarians. We're freely entered into being custodians of that knowledge in negotiation with community there as well. I had a fantastic presentation as well too, where I was able to meet some fantastic people from Aotearoa, and they were talking about indigenising spaces. And the piece that really spoke to me was, if we want to grow and feel like we belong in this space, we need to feel culture. We need to understand that identity is either erased or it is upheld in what we do in libraries there too. Going back on a theme that was presented earlier on there, I myself, as I said, my Kulin Indigenous person myself, so I've never lived on country, but I've got family connections in Queensland, in the Northern Territory there. But this is still a space where I'm personally trying to understand myself. And I was able to get this bursary from Alia and Gabrielle Watts, who funded the bursary, to go to Canada and to go along to this forum here. But I still felt so new to this space here myself that I did have that really strong sense of imposter syndrome the whole way through. And then when you go into that sort of mindset there, you think about the trauma that's your family's gone through in that sense there, and it all sort of feeds in upon itself. But then we went along to this presentation here, and one of the librarians who was quite new to the profession himself, was talking about his experience there, and it was pretty much just saying word for word what I was feeling in that moment too. He was quite young, quite new to the profession, still understanding his culture there as well. And we had a bit of a yarn afterwards there for a good half an hour or so. And it was just that moment of, all right, not alone in this. This is something that's actually really common, and the only way to grow in this sense is to talk to people, put yourself out there when you feel comfortable, and just share what's going on in that sense. And it was just a real eye-opening moment. And I thought it was fantastic, but I didn't think too much of it. And I went, following day, went back to the final day of the forum, and his manager, who was also there, came up to me the next day, and he's like, mate, that conversation you had with him, amazing. He was in, and we were all in tears, and we're just going like, this is fantastic. This is one of those things where all these sort of different identities that you've got professionally, culturally, whatever it might be, they're all intersecting, and it's at that moment there you're like, okay, this is meaningful. This actually is something that's going to be something that I'm going to hold on to for the rest of my life there as well. And it was just a really powerful moment to be able to do something like that. So, and sorry, that's a bit of an aside, but as far as belonging goes, that was a real shining moment for me to be able to do that. It was a conference, so there were posters all around the place there. There were posters on drag, Indigenous reading in academic libraries. There was Bone, Indigenous zines. There was Maori book clubs. There was community engagement there as well too. So amazing posters, amazing projects happening right across the world there. Over in, I think it was Norway, I think there was some work happening there as well too. It was just fantastic stuff. So I am conscious of time, so I'll really try and hammer through these last couple of slides here. For me, as an Indigenous librarian, there aren't many forums where I can speak as myself in this sort of way there. There are symposiums that take place, and I know Kaval had a fantastic one with Informa earlier on this year, and there were some fantastic Indigenous voices taking place there. This had a totally different feel in the sense that it was Indigenous driven, every single aspect of the forum there as well. There were non-Indigenous people that came along. There was heavily subsidised attendance there for students in particular who could go along, who were very new to the profession and wanted to learn more. We really wanted to encourage that. But this was, just a really special event there, I should say. And it really focused on the idea of Indigenous librarianship, and not just for ourselves, but also emphasising the benefit that Indigenous librarianship can have for libraries across the board there. So focusing on knowledge systems there, building community engagement. I know it's very easy to look inward at times, but if you're if you're doing anything with Indigenous knowledges or working with Indigenous communities, you have to have that community engagement in some way. Looking at protocols there, whether that's data sovereignty, looking at data governance there as well too, decolonisation, language revitalisation, all of these are fantastic projects that can take place, and that's where Indigenous librarianship really I'd love to see it really encouraged to grow in that sort of sense there, because of course what is good for mob is good for everyone. This was a table from Cindy Hall earlier, and this was just a little thing that she put together saying what Indigenous peoples can bring to the library. We like to think this is self-evident in some sort of way there, but actually seeing on the screen when I saw that, it's like, oh yeah, there's actually a few things that I can contribute there, the knowledge, the skills, the abilities, the experience. The whole self. That's really, really touching there, I think, too. If you are new to this, or if you want to look a bit more into this particular space there, what I would highly recommend anybody do, particularly if you are in any sort of leadership position there as well, is read the white paper that was released straight after this forum here. So a lot of this was based off of feedback from participants who went to the forum in 2023 in Hawaii. But a lot of the key findings were, again, this is from the perspective of Indigenous librarians themselves. So some of it's a bit hard to read, some of it's not too pleasant, but it focuses on things like the fact that there isn't a huge amount of trust in libraries in Indigenous communities there. How do we address that? Languages needs to be revitalised in a really systemic way there. There are not a huge amount of Indigenous library staff, and the ones that do work in libraries don't necessarily have structures in place to make them feel safe and empowered. And there's some pretty hard reading in that respect there as well too. Policies for collection management more broadly there, supporting Indigenous knowledge organisation there. But even for non-Indigenous staff there too, trying to have affirming library staff training for everybody to really understand the benefits there as well, so is really important. And engaging Indigenous perspectives in librarianship. It is something that's so valuable. I see so often that everybody is really willing to engage in this space, and there's a lot of really genuine feeling and support in this space. But it's getting to that next step of going, all right, how do I actively act as an ally in this sense? And what do I do to support those who are not only in community, but also Indigenous librarians working amongst you? This is a quote directly from the white paper there. So I will read this one out nice and quickly there. But institutions say they want to do better and engage with communities, indigenise curricula, but budgets and priorities say otherwise. It's very hard to do work relying purely on the goodwill of other colleagues who already have other job responsibilities or do work without supportive resources to move things forward. It's that cultural load that can be quite tricky there. And if we do want to work in this space, investing in some way or another is a really important aspect of it there. There's a few final reflections there. Libraries are not neutral. We have an opinion on all these things here. But what I really want to focus on for everybody to think about, if you want to look at a way to help make libraries a place of belonging for Indigenous peoples that you might be serving there, build those relationships, advocate for inclusive metadata, because of course we want to access information that's really important to us there as well. And Indigenous librarianship as in itself is essential to self-determination there. So the fact that this forum in itself was led by Indigenous peoples from all around the world, from start to finish, we felt in control at every step of the process there. The very last thing we did for the forum is everybody who identified as Indigenous, we got around in a big circle, we had a big yarn, and it was so safe, and it was a bit confronting at times, but it was a space where we just let it all out, and it was so affirming that we were able to do that. And in that sort of sense there as well, as a result of that, I've tried to meet a few other people who work in libraries in Victoria who are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. If you are here today, if you're watching this and we haven't met, please reach out as well too. There's my email there, and there's a few of the fantastic librarians who I was able to meet there. Ray, Ryan, Kirsten, and Leslie there as well too, who was just so wonderful and welcoming at every step of the process there as well too. So thank you all very much for listening to that presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so thank you so much, Carl. This is a fascinating insight into an international conference with a very, very important focus. There are questions there, but we might have time for one question. So I'll go through the most upvoted. So the question was, were there moments that shifted or challenged your understanding of what libraries can be?
Sorry, could you repeat that question again?
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Were there moments that shifted or challenged your understanding of what libraries can be?
That's a pretty tough question there. Libraries, I mean, I wouldn't be a librarian if I didn't believe in the profession itself and what we can achieve there, honestly. I've seen some fantastic things that we can do. It was so positive to actually see that the experience that that I've had here in Australia, the experience that I've heard others have in other states in Australia is actually quite similar right across the world there. So when I'm talking to a librarian from Vancouver about the tricky situation of having a reference interview for frontline staff who don't really feel comfortable engaging with Indigenous knowledges there, I can take that on and go, well, that's actually something that we're having a similar issue with here. And I'm talking to someone in Aotearoa there about the fact that our researchers are not necessarily engaging in the appropriate research and engaging with like the care principles, for example, there. It's something that I felt that I could really relate to there. But at the same time, meeting some really world-leading librarians there, academics there, I was able to really see that this is not something that we have to do on our own, that there is some really good quality research out there, there's projects out there that are taking place, and that there's some fantastic examples of best practice that we as a whole profession can really learn from and take some great heart in that. If we do want to truly engage in this sort of space there, that we can actually make some genuine change there. And seeing some fantastic case studies of community themselves changing that perspective there and going, okay, if the library is a really safe space for me there, there's this person that I can trust. Like, that is just absolutely fantastic to see that in practice. And yeah, that was the really sort of affirming part of me going along to that session there, was seeing that all take place.
Yeah, no, thank you, Carl, for sharing those powerful reflections from the International Indigenous Librarians Forum, and also to thank you everyone for your questions. And I'm sure Carl will be able to answer those questions if you reach out to him. He shared his contact details. So as this was our final presentation, I'll pass the baton to Kellyanne Smith, who's a digital learning resource specialist from RMIT University, who will wrap up the first day of this CRIG seminar. Over to you, Kellyanne.
Thanks, Sarika, for facilitating this Q&A and for our Q&A earlier. It's really great to hear and dig deeper into the experiences of our participants through our questions. So I want to conclude our first part of our virtual trilogy, first by thanking all of our speakers, Jane, Ennis, Sarah, Paula, and Carl, for sharing their experience, their expertise, and their research with us. I'd also like to thank my seminar working group colleagues for helping to organize and run the event. You can feel free to contact any of the speakers with further questions that you might have after the webinar. You can send an email to us at members@caval.edu.au. We're going to put that in the chat for you, and the team will forward any questions that you have. We wanted to share as a sustainable thank you gift to our presenters. Caval has arranged for native trees to be planted through the organization 15 Trees. So we planted trees this winter through 2 sets of plantings, one in Westgate Park in Melbourne and the other in Mount Mercer in regional Victoria. So as mentioned, this was only the first session of the webinar series, and we have lots more to come. So tomorrow we're going to start at 10 a.m. That's Australian Eastern Daylight Time, and we'll focus on open educational resources. So we have Liam Lee Frost Camilleri joining us from Federation University Australia, and Dr. Amanda White, recipient of the Medal of the Order of Australia from University of Technology, Sydney, and they'll be sharing their practice with us. We expect you'll come away with some excellent practical tips from the webinar. And then on Thursday, we begin at 2 p.m., again, Australian Eastern Daylight Time, and we'll bring you a short presentation and 2 lightning talks that come from RMIT University, Deakin, and University of Melbourne. And then we finish with a really powerful keynote on a decolonized library, and that's from Professor Kathomi Gatwiri. Kathomi is one of Australia's leading Afro-diasporic scholars, and her award-winning research, interdisciplinary research that investigates intersecting topics, racial trauma, belonging, Blackness, and migranthood. And Kathomi's keynote will not be recorded, so we want to make sure that you join us live on the day. It's going to be a really great talk. If you're looking for a creative outlet, don't forget about our Raven mascot competition that Ramona mentioned briefly, and we've got lots of information about that online on LinkedIn if you're looking for it. That entries close tonight at midnight, so you'll need to send those off to us at members@caval.edu.au. And then during the final day of the seminar, the winning Raven will be selected by popular audience vote, so make sure that you're there and you don't miss it. You can find registration links to further information in the chat. And thank you again to everyone for attending today. And I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow and on Thursday. Enjoy the rest of your day.